what's so interesting is all the different ways you can now tell Australian stories. So I'm thinking of Trent Dalton, who was for a long time a colleague of mine at The Australian. He worked for the magazine.
So all the other publishers then went, there was a belief that Australian crime couldn't sell.
Yeah.
And she demonstrated, that it really could.
Yours are really flat. And mine,
really good value for money, yes.
Yeah, they're real value for money. I am so rapt to be here with you today because although you are considerably older than me...
Decrepit, yes.
Okay, a little older than me. I remember when you started.
It started writing, yeah. It's maybe the only profession where you can be an exciting emerging prospect in your late 50s.
That's right. An ingenue in your late 50s. I remember so many journalists decide at some point in their careers that they would like to write a book. They've often got one, in the bottom drawer. And not all of them, finish the first one, let alone go on and do this. You must be rapt.
Oh, yeah, I have to pinch myself. I'm living the dream. I think this idea that you can actually live a life as a writer because, as you know, even the people who manage to get published in Australia seldom make enough money to do it as a full-time job. So they're doing it, and they've got kids and all that, and suddenly I'm free to write books, and I never imagined that could ever happen to me. That was something when I was young, that happened. It would seem to be that people who wrote books lived in New York and London and had been to Oxbridge or something like that, What about you? Was that... Because what we have in common, of course, is we're both journalists, or at least I was a journalist. Was it always your dream to be writing books?
I don't know about that because I reckon sometimes I've got the best job now as the literary editor for The Australian because my job is to kind of promote new authors when they come through, like debuts. Actually, there's a festival coming up and I'm interviewing 4 debut writers. And I can't be more excited about it because you're right. There was a time when it was really difficult to make a living as an Australian writer and really difficult to get a book published. But what I'm finding now is that publishing houses, because they've got some big successes, your publishing house calls it every time you release a book, hammer time, because they're just so excited and all the readers are so excited that you've got a new one out. But what they do is they use the success of somebody really big like you to fund some of the younger ones who are coming up or the newer ones that are coming up. Because if they make a lot of money on these books, then they've got enough money to kind of spread around to people who are just trying out. I think that's fantastic.
It does. I'm very lucky or very fortunate. I delivered my first book, the manuscript for Scrublands, which is a murder mystery set in a drought-stricken town in the outback, just after The Dry was published. And Jane Harper really kicked down the doors. That book, The Dry, was a massive success, not only in Australia but around the world.
And the movie as well.
Yeah, and so all the other publishers then went, there was a belief that Australian crime couldn't sell.
Yeah.
And she demonstrated that it really could. And so now I was just recently at this year's Ned Kelly Awards for crime fiction. They had 70 or 80 books for the General Fiction Prize.
70 or 80?
Yeah, that's for the last year that have been sort of nominated, put in. Whereas you go back 10 years and there might have only been 6 books in Australia or something published. So that's a real wave. And not just in crime, but in other areas as well.
And what's so interesting is all the different ways you can now tell Australian stories. So I'm thinking of Trent Dalton, who was for a long time a colleague of mine at The Australian. He worked for the magazine. So I think in the last month I've seen the Netflix show of Boy Swallows Universe comes out, but he's also got the stage play of love stories going on in Brisbane. He's part of various podcasts. He's making movies. He's doing an opera, I think. Is there an opera? I'm pretty sure there's some kind of musical as well.
If not, why not?
And if not, why not? Exactly. So it's like all these different ways to tell Australian stories that didn't exist when I was growing up.
The other... So Trent's book, Boy Swallows Universe, came out the same year as Scrublands, and there was a bunch of us who had books at the same time. Holly Ringland, Dervla McTiernan, Christian White.
Just all went boom.
Christian's another one who writes screenplays. The other person like that, of course, is Craig Silvey.
Yeah.
And now he's the movie of Brunt is out.
It's just out this month.
Yeah.
So I think to myself when I look at runs, because Craig Silvey is one of the nicest people you would ever meet. He deserves all his success. But this story is so Australian. Like, he's hit the nail right on the head. The idea that you live in a town where your parents might be struggling a little bit. There's some, climate problems going on. It's often very dry. Then you've got a mutt of a dog that you're backing to win Crufts of all things in England. It's a bit like the Ashes, isn't it? It's like, take the little runtish dog over to England and see if it can beat all of these fancy poodles. I think the audience is going to love it.
Yeah. And, as you say, one of the nicest guys, and all power to him. Now, what I want to know about you, though, is I really can't get my mind about how you managed to achieve everything, because being a literary editor of The Australian, I couldn't do that because I just couldn't stay on top of all the books. I'm like a slow reader. I'm quite a fast writer, but I'm a slow reader. How do you manage to do that?
Well, hundreds of books come into the office every week. And what I try to do, to be honest with you, Chris, is I think to myself, I need to get a really good mix. So I need some fiction and non-fiction and crime and romance and science and biography. And so it kind of does itself in a way, because once you think, okay, well, I'm going to focus on this fiction, this non-fiction, this science book, this biography, because there's only a certain number that we can fit into the pages. So it kind of works that way. But it breaks your heart every time you hear from somebody who's like, can you review my book? I estimate that we review 3% of the books that come into the office. I get about 100 on a given day, and of those I'll select 3. But interestingly, self-published or traditionally published, I don't discriminate. So you can be a self-published author and you have exactly the same rate of success as somebody who's published, because I think actually being self-published doesn't mean your book is no good. It means that you couldn't find a publisher, and that's completely different.
And there are people who actually could find a publisher but decide to go, particularly I think in romance, and I've met some here and some internationally, who make like truckloads of money. They're really successful.
There's a girl in Brisbane who's writing romance, mainly online and for Audible, and she's selling millions.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't do it because they're very entrepreneurial, and they do everything, all the marketing, the sales, the editing, the whole kit and caboodle. It's a phenomenal thing. Now, you've got all these books coming in, you're reading them. Do you find it sort of creeping in and influencing what you're writing yourself, or can you sort of draw a line between those things?
Well, the biggest problem I have is so much of what comes in is so outstanding. I just think that is so good. I wish I'd done that. Sometimes there's like a fantastic idea as well. In the last couple of months, I've read some astonishing Australian fiction, and I just think, oh my goodness, what a beautiful, beautiful idea. So there was a book that came out of Melbourne called Falling Diving, or Diving Falling, one of those. Cheryl will know, she'll correct me. It's about an artist who's obviously based on one of those really big name Australian artists, but no one specifically, and he's died, and he's left behind his will, and his will is very pointed. It's like a little nasty joke in it. He's left $69,000 to his mistress. And I thought, so we know exactly who we're dealing with here, like a real misogynist, really full of himself. And it's about the way his kind of widow has to navigate life. Well, she's had to navigate her life in the shadow of this genius, this creative genius. But also now he's gone, and there's like got to get rid of the paintings, and you've got all this money and galleries all. I thought, what a really great idea, because how many times have you heard stories like that about the art world? But I wouldn't feel confident to write it because I don't know enough about it. So when those books come in, my key emotion is jealousy. Envy, and not having thought of that myself.
No, I think sometimes you get a book and the concept is so powerful that, the writing itself might not be beautiful or particularly eloquent or anything, but it's almost like the idea carries the story.
Such a good idea,
and that's I find. Now, I'd be interested to hear what you think about this. So this is my 7th fiction book, and you're up to like 14 or so, right? I do think you get better at the process, but there's no guarantee that every book's going to be incrementally better than the one before. because it just depends whether it's a really good story, whether the story comes together, right?
Well, what I like about the way your books are developing is I feel like I'm getting to know your characters as you're getting to know them. Like, I think you know your protagonist much better now than you did when you first started.
Oh,
because there's
absolutely.
all different threads to his life that you've been able to create, and you've filled him out in a way. Like, he's got real flesh on him now, hasn't he? He's really... And he's interesting because he's getting older. What I want to know is, how old are you going to get him to?
I'm going to age them in real time. It occurred to me recently, I was interviewing Michael Connolly, the great American crime writer, and his guy Harry Bosch, when he starts, he's a Vietnam vet. And he's sick, his knees are going, he's diabetic, so and in the TV show they made the deliberate decision that they make him younger, and they turned him into a Gulf War vet instead, right?
So they can stretch it out a little longer, probably.
Yeah, but the books, there's a book a year, and the Martin Scarsden is the journo, and the police officers, they age a year in every book.
Does everybody ask you whether it's you?
Oh, with Martin, yeah. So the first three books, Martin is the journalist. Now, what happened is I was working for what was then known as Fairfax in Canberra. I'd written some non-fiction, but I didn't have the time or resources, so I thought I'll try my hand at crime fiction. But I realised I didn't know anything about the police. I'd never been a crime reporter or a court reporter. I thought, well, I'll use a journo. So he's based on me in that I knew about, deadlines and the practice of journalism. But he's more based on no particular person, but a type of correspondent I used to run into when I worked for Dateline and SBS. And so I was this sort of roving foreign correspondent. And sometimes if I went to conflict zones, you'd run into the same people, and they'd bounce from, Bosnia to Cambodia to, the Middle East. And they're not post-traumatic, just traumatised. No
post about it. They're
no post
right
about
in their trauma.
And self-medicating and all of that.
Yeah, alcohol. And...
So Martin, at the start of Scrublands, I deliberately decided he wouldn't be an alcoholic because I just thought it'd be too cliched. And then in the next book, you find out why he's not an alcoholic, because his father was.
Yeah.
But so he was sort of based on that sort of a bit Peter Pan-y in that, he's 40, but he's never had a proper relationship or anything like that. But he just started as an idea, and then as the books developed, he developed. And it's the same with Ivan and Nell. Do
you think your female readers are falling in love with him?
I reckon they might be falling in love with Luke Arnold, who plays him in the TV show. And the question now is, when I write, if I write another Martin book, whether I'm going to be thinking of Luke, the way he looks.
Oh, so you're actually influenced by the TV show, not the other way around.
Yes, because in Scrublands, Martin isn't described because everything's been told through his eyes.
Yeah.
There's one scene when he's looking himself in the mirror, but what he's seeing is bloodshot eyes and he looks sunburnt and whatever. And he doesn't describe himself, and we don't describe ourselves when we look in the mirror. What we notice, a bit of a blemish there or whatever. So Mandy in the TV show is exactly how she's described in the books. But Martin wasn't. So now I'm wondering, whether I'll
start to look through his eyes.
And I heard Anne Cleves once, who wrote Shetland and the Vera Stanhope books, and she said the guy who plays Jimmy Perez in Shetland is great, but he looks nothing like how she imagined him in the book. Whereas Vera, Brenda Blenheim, I think is the character, has overtaken the character of Vera that when Anne writes, that's all she can see.
And then do you remember when they made the Jack Reacher movie?
Oh, yes.
And it wasn't anything like he is in the book. Like, the one thing about him in the book, the reason he's called Jack Reacher is because he can reach for things. Like that, actually Lee Child's wife named him because she said to him something about, I like the fact that you're a reacher, you can get things from the top of the supermarket shelves, and it's stuck in his mind. But then they put Tom Cruise, who everyone knows is 5'2", right?
Yeah. And Lee Child himself he's not built, but he's extremely tall.
He's long, isn't he? He's like a licorice
tall.
strap. Yeah, he's very long and thin.
Yeah, so I think that there's a streaming service one with it now, which is the guy looks much more suitable. Yeah.
I think that was a disaster. And the problem was, of course, that fans who love Jack Reacher, his height and his masculinity and his testosterone and his all of that kind of thing was an important part of why they liked him. So suddenly when you've got this guy who's maybe a bit, fast on his feet or whatever, like Tom Cruise plays, but it's not the character you're looking for.
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting that they could muck that up so badly, especially when, did you see how much they paid? I think it was like $350 million. Like it was a lot. It was a lot for that particular franchise.
Yeah, well, I had to knock him back for Scrublands.
Did you, Tom?
Yeah.
Not the right character. Too American accent. He does his own stunts though.
Oh, true. Yeah, I guess you save money there.
I do want to know what he does with his face because he looks so young. He looks the same as he looked in Risky Business.
True. Are you tempted at all to try screenwriting?
No. You know what's really interesting? Because the job I've got I love so much, I'm kind of thinking about it's nice not to have to sit down and do what you're doing, a really long thing. Like I notice your book, look at the difference. Yours are really fat and mine...
Really good value for money, yes.
Yeah, they're real value for money. And mine are really kind of skinny. Like this one's really skinny as well. I'm kind of enjoying not having to do something over long form because I know you're good at it and I know that you've got a natural talent, but it's still hard work to sit there and produce. Are these 150,000 words?
No, they're about 120. I think Silver's about 140. But, yeah, that's it. Let's finish, but let me ask you one last question. What's next?
I don't know. What about you?
I reckon I'll just write another book.